He was their shepherd, their healer, their rock. But behind closed doors, Pastor Peter carried a secret so dark it threatened to consume him. In Nakuru, Kenya, Pastor Peter stood at the pulpit, his voice commanding and full of conviction as he preached about repentance, faith, and living a life pleasing to God. To his congregation, he was larger than life, a man chosen by God to lead them through trials and tribulations. His sermons brought tears to their eyes and fire to their souls. He prayed over the sick, fed the hungry, and traveled across continents on humanitarian missions. To everyone who knew him, he was a saint. But saints are only human, and humans have secrets. By day, Peter was the epitome of holiness, a man devoted to serving Christ. By night, under the cover of darkness, he became someone else entirely. Beneath the polished exterior lay desires so raw, so forbidden, that even he struggled to reconcile them with the man standing before the pulpit each Sunday. It all began innocently enough, or so he told himself. Church missions abroad gave him an excuse to leave Nakuru, to step away from the suffocating expectations placed upon him as a pastor, husband, and father. Amsterdam became his escape, a city of liberation where rules blurred and freedom reigned supreme. There he met Anne. She wasn't just a lover. She was his accomplice, the only person who truly understood the storm raging inside him, and was different from anyone Peter had ever known. She didn't judge him or demand explanations. Instead, she embraced him, the real him, the man hidden beneath the holy robes. Together, they explored a world hidden from prying eyes. Private clubs, intimate encounters, and unspoken desires. For those brief moments, Peter wasn't Pastor Peter anymore. He was free. Free to be vulnerable, to embrace passions he had long suppressed. Their bond grew stronger with every trip. They shared everything, desires, fantasies, secrets. Late into the night, they talked about their darkest fears and deepest regrets, and confided in him about her own struggles with guilt and shame, while Peter revealed fragments of his fractured identity. In each other they found solace, acceptance, and love. But freedom always comes at a cost. As Peter boarded yet another plane bound for Amsterdam, anticipation mixed with unease. This time felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger in why. Perhaps it was the lingering feeling that his double life was becoming harder to maintain. Or maybe it was something else. Something waiting for him in the shadows. What happens when the mask you've worn for years begins to crack? When your sacred responsibilities clash with your deepest secrets, who do you become? The neon lights of Amsterdam reflected off the rain-slicked streets as Peter stepped out of the taxi. His trench coat pulled tightly around him. Across the street, and waited under a lamppost, her silhouette framed by the glow of a nearby club sign. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all pretense fell away. This was where Peter felt most alive, free from judgment, free from expectation. Anne greeted him with a warm smile. "You look different already," she said softly. And she was right. In her presence, Peter shed the weight of his public persona, becoming simply Peter. They walked hand in hand toward their favorite spot, a private lounge tucked away in the heart of the city. The air inside was thick with music and laughter, but Peter barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, replaying fragments of conversations he'd had earlier that week with Esther, his wife. She had been asking questions lately. Too many questions. About his trips, his late-night phone calls, the unfamiliar receipts she'd found tucked into his suitcase. "Something's bothering you," Anne observed as they settled into a quiet corner booth. Her voice was gentle but probing. "Talk to me." Peter hesitated, torn between confessing and burying the truth deeper. Finally he sighed. "It's getting harder to keep this up. Every time I go back home it feels like I'm living two completely separate lives. And Esther, she's starting to notice things." And reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I get it. You're scared. But running isn't going to fix anything. Sooner or later, these worlds are going to collide." Her words sent a chill down Peter's spine. Collide. He hated even thinking about it. What would happen if Esther discovered the truth? If his congregation found out? The very thought made his stomach churn. Later that night, after a steamy session in one of the club's private rooms, Peter lay beside and staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with unresolved fears and doubts. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" he asked quietly. "About the consequences?" Anne turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Of course I do. But I also think about how much happier you are here, with me, with yourself. Isn't that worth something?" Peter didn't answer. How could he? She was right in a way. Being with and allowed him to embrace parts of himself he'd buried long ago. Yet the guilt lingered, gnawing at him like an open wound. Back in Nakuru, Esther sat alone in their quiet home, scrolling through photos of Peter's recent mission trip on social media. Something about the captions didn't sit right with her. Why did he always post pictures of himself with strangers instead of showing where he actually went or who he met? She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Meanwhile, Sarah, Peter's daughter, was navigating her own challenges in Amsterdam. Away from home for the first time, she was eager to explore her independence. But freedom came with its own temptations, ones she hadn't anticipated when she arrived. Late-night parties, new friends, and experiences that pushed boundaries further than she'd ever imagined. The next morning, Peter woke up in Anne's apartment, sunlight streaming through the blinds. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying fragments of their conversation from the night before. Her words echoed in his mind. Sooner or later, these worlds are going to collide. It wasn't just a warning, it felt like prophecy. Anne stirred beside him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You didn't sleep well," she observed softly, her voice tinged with concern. Peter forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired," he lied, avoiding her gaze. Truth was, he hadn't slept at all. His dreams had been restless, a kaleidoscope of stained glass windows, neon lights, and accusing stares. For the first time in years he felt truly powerless. And sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Peter. You're carrying too much. Let me help you." Her sincerity cut deeper than any accusation ever could. How could he explain that the weight of his secrets didn't just belong to him? That they were tied to everyone he loved? His wife, his daughter, his congregation. Instead he deflected. "It's nothing. Just church stuff weighing on my mind." And raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Now. She slipped out of bed and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Below, the city buzzed with life. Tourists snapping photos, cyclists weaving through traffic, and couples strolling hand in hand. It was a world so different from the one Peter inhabited back home. "You know," Anne said, glancing over her shoulder, "you can't run forever. Sooner or later, these lives you're living will collide." Her words sent a chill down Peter's spine. Collide. He hated even thinking about it. What would happen if Esther discovered the truth? If his congregation found out? The very thought made his stomach churn. Later that day, Peter visited Sarah under the guise of checking on her studies. Sitting across from her in a quaint cafe near her university, he marveled at how grown-up she looked. Gone was the little girl who used to sit on his lap, asking endless questions about God and faith. Now she was poised, confident, a young woman charting her own path. "How are classes going?" Peter asked, sipping his coffee. Sarah smiled brightly. "Great. I've got a lot of practicals this semester, so it's busy, but I love it." "And your social life? Are you meeting new people?" Her smile faltered for a split second, so brief Peter almost missed it. Then she nodded. "Yeah, I've made some friends. Mostly classmates, but also others outside school." Peter wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but he stopped himself. What right did he have to pry when he was hiding so much of himself? Still, the image of her laughing with strangers lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Back in Nakuru, Esther noticed subtle changes in her husband whenever he returned from his trips. There was a restlessness in his eyes, a distance that hadn't been there before. One evening, while folding laundry, she found a receipt tucked inside his suitcase, a charge from a restaurant in Amsterdam dated the same night he claimed to be visiting Sarah. Esther stared at the receipt, her heart sinking. Why would he lie about something so small? And what else might he be hiding? The memory of Sarah as a child lingered in Peter's mind long after their cafe meeting. Back then, she had been the perfect picture of faith, a young girl who loved God with an innocence that seemed almost otherworldly. He remembered how she used to sit beside him during church services, her hands clasped tightly in prayer, her voice ringing out louder than anyone else's during hymns. "Daddy, do you think I'll go to heaven?" she'd once asked him, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Will Jesus be proud of me?" Peter had smiled at her then, ruffling her hair. "Of course, sweetheart. You're already his little light." But now, sitting across from her in that bustling Amsterdam cafe, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Her laughter sounded different, edged with a confidence he didn't recognize. And there were moments when her gaze drifted away, as if she were hiding something. "Are you still going to church here?" Peter asked casually, trying not to sound too probing. Finding a good fellowship can make all the difference when you're far from home. Sarah hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air. For a moment, Peter thought he saw guilt flicker across her face. Then she nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I've been to a couple of services. It's nice to connect with people who share my values." Her answer reassured him, or so he told himself. Yet deep down doubt lingered. Why did she seem so defensive? And why hadn't she invited him to join her at one of these services? Back in Nakuru, Esther sat alone in their quiet home, scrolling through old family photos on her phone. One image caught her eye. A photo of Sarah taken years ago during a youth retreat. She was standing on stage, leading worship, her face glowing with joy. Esther sighed, her heart aching. That girl felt like a stranger now. When had they grown so distant? Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, Sarah navigated her double life with increasing ease. By day, she attended classes, studied diligently, and maintained the appearance of a model Christian daughter. But by night, she ventured into a world her father would never understand. A world of freedom, experimentation, and rebellion against the strict moral code she had grown up with. It started innocently enough. A late-night party hosted by classmates. A few drinks to loosen up. Conversations that pushed boundaries further than she'd ever imagined. At first, guilt gnawed at her every time she stepped outside the lines. But over time, the thrill of breaking free from expectations overshadowed her doubts. One evening, Sarah found herself in a dimly lit club, surrounded by strangers who didn't know or care who she really was. The music throbbed in her chest, drowning out the voices of judgment and shame. Here she could be whoever she wanted to be. No rules, no expectations, just freedom. The next morning, Peter sat alone in his hotel room, staring out at the bustling streets of Amsterdam. The city was alive with energy, cyclists weaving through traffic, tourists snapping photos, and vendors shouting over the hum of conversation. Yet, despite the chaos outside, Peter felt trapped in a suffocating silence, and had left early to run errands, leaving him to his thoughts. And those thoughts were relentless. Images of Sarah flickered in his mind, the way she laughed too brightly, the way her eyes darted away when he asked about church. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. He reached for his Bible, flipping through its worn pages as if seeking solace. But the words that once brought him comfort now felt hollow. How could he preach repentance and forgiveness when he couldn't even reconcile his own sins? "God, what have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "How did I let this happen?" But there was no answer, only the deafening weight of his guilt. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah was navigating her own storm of emotions. After another restless night spent questioning her choices, she decided to visit a small chapel tucked away in the heart of the city. It was quiet, unassuming, a place where she could escape the noise of her double life. Kneeling in the pew, she closed her eyes and tried to pray. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, fragments of memories surfaced. Her father's sermons, her mother's gentle guidance, the hymns she used to sing with such fervor. Tears pricked her eyes as guilt washed over her. "What am I doing?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why does everything feel so wrong?" She wanted to believe that God still loved her, that he could forgive her for the secrets she kept. But doubt crept in, whispering cruel truths. Was she beyond redemption? Had she strayed too far to ever find her way back? Back in Nakuru, Esther grew increasingly uneasy. She replayed snippets of conversations with Peter, searching for answers to questions she didn't fully understand. Why did he always seem distracted after his trips? Why did he avoid talking about Sarah's life in Amsterdam? One evening, while organizing Peter's study, she stumbled upon an old journal hidden beneath a stack of papers. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it, her hands trembling. The entries were dated years ago, written during a particularly difficult period in Peter's ministry. One passage stood out. "I am drowning in my own hypocrisy. The man they see is not who I truly am. If they knew the truth, they would never forgive me." Esther's breath caught in her throat. What truth? What was he hiding? And how long had he been carrying this burden? The faint hum of street noise filtered through the curtains as Peter sat at the edge of his hotel bed, lost in thought. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a video call from Esther. He hesitated before answering, bracing himself for whatever she might say. "Hi, love," he greeted her, forcing a smile. "Everything okay?" Esther's face appeared on the screen, her expression unreadable. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," she said, her voice calm but laced with an undertone of suspicion. Peter's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "I was organizing your study yesterday," she began slowly, "and I came across one of your old journals. It caught my attention." His heart skipped a beat. Which journal had she found? And how much had she read? "It's nothing important," he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Just some old reflections from years ago." Esther tilted her head slightly, studying him through the screen. "Are you sure? Some of the things you wrote sounded heavy. Like you were carrying a lot back then." Peter swallowed hard, his mind racing. Was she fishing for information? Or had she already pieced together more than he realized? "I'm fine now," he said firmly, trying to sound convincing. "That was a long time ago, Esther. We all have moments we're not proud of." She nodded, though her eyes remained sharp. "I just want to make sure you're okay. You've seemed distant lately, especially after your trips. If there's something you need to share." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Peter forced a laugh, deflecting her concern. "It's nothing really. Just work stress. Don't worry about me." But as they ended the call, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that Esther knew more than she let on. Had she read between the lines of his journal entries? Worse still, what if she decided to dig deeper? Meanwhile, Sarah sat alone in her dorm room, scrolling through social media. A notification popped up, a photo tagged by one of her friends from last night's club outing. Her stomach dropped as she saw herself in the picture, mid-laugh, surrounded by strangers. Someone had commented, "Looking wild," beneath the post. Panic surged through her veins. She deleted the tag immediately, but the damage was done. What if someone from church saw it? What if her parents found out? She couldn't let them see her like this, their once devout daughter turned unrecognizable. She opened her Bible, flipping through its pages in desperation. The familiar verses did little to calm her racing heart. Instead, guilt gnawed at her, whispering cruel truths. "You're not the person they think you are." Later that evening, Sarah attended a small prayer meeting hosted by a local Christian group for expat students. Sitting among strangers, she listened half-heartedly as others shared testimonies of faith and redemption. One girl spoke about overcoming addiction, another about finding peace after years of rebellion. Their stories stirred something deep inside her, a longing for the simplicity of her old life, before the lies and secrets consumed her. Afterward, a kind-faced woman approached her. "You seem troubled," she said gently. "Would you like to talk?" Sarah hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to confide in someone, to unburden herself of the weight she carried, but fear held her back. What if they judged her? What if they told her father? "No, thank you," she murmured, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." As she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, bold text flashed across the screen. Back in Nakuru, Esther wrestled with her own suspicions. The journal entry replayed in her mind. "I am drowning in my own hypocrisy. The man they see is not who I truly am." What had Peter meant by that? And why did it feel like he was still hiding something? Determined to get answers, she decided to call Sarah under the pretense of checking in. "How's everything going?" Esther asked, her tone casual but probing. "It's good, Mom," Sarah replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Classes are busy, but I'm managing." "And your spiritual life? Are you staying connected to God?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I've been trying," Sarah said finally. "It's just hard sometimes, you know?" Esther frowned, sensing the hesitation in her daughter's voice. "Hard how?" Before she could press further, Sarah changed the subject, asking about life back home. The next morning, Esther sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. Peter's journal entry echoed in her mind like an unanswered question. "The man they see is not who I truly am." What did that mean? Was he still living a double life? And if so, how far had it gone? Her gaze drifted to the calendar pinned on the wall. Peter was due back from Amsterdam in 2 days. Normally, she looked forward to his return, but now dread coiled in her stomach. What would happen when he walked through the door? Would he confront her about the journal? Or would he continue pretending nothing was wrong? Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, Peter paced the length of his hotel room, replaying his conversation with Esther over and over in his mind. Her probing questions had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He knew he couldn't keep running from the truth, not when cracks were beginning to form in the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his secrets. And called later that afternoon, sensing his unease. "You're not okay," she said bluntly after exchanging pleasantries. "What's going on?" Peter hesitated, then sighed. "Esther found one of my old journals. She didn't say much, but I can tell she suspects something." Anne's voice softened. "Do you think she knows about us?" "I don't know," Peter admitted. "But she's asking questions. Questions I don't have answers for." Anne paused, her silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally she said, "Maybe this is your chance to come clean, to tell her everything." "Are you serious?" Peter snapped, his voice tinged with panic. "How could I ever explain this to her? To anyone? They'd never understand." "They might surprise you," Anne replied quietly. "But either way, you can't keep living like this. Secrets always find their way into the light." Her words lingered long after they ended the call. Secrets always find their way into the light. Peter sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. How could he possibly untangle the web he'd woven without destroying everything, and everyone, he loved? Across town, Sarah wrestled with her own guilt. After deleting the incriminating photo tag, she tried to distract herself by studying, but her mind kept drifting back to the club, to the people she'd met, to the person she was becoming. Who was she really? The devout Christian daughter her parents believed in? Or the rebellious young woman who craved freedom at any cost? That night, unable to shake her restlessness, she decided to visit another private gathering, a low-key event hosted by friends of friends. As she stepped into the dimly lit space, pulsating music and flickering lights enveloped her, momentarily drowning out her doubts. Here, she wasn't Sarah the preacher's daughter. She was simply free. But as the hours passed, a nagging voice in the back of her mind reminded her of the risks. What if someone recognized her? What if word got back to her father? The thought sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside, telling herself she deserved this escape, even if it came at a price. Back in Nakuru, Esther scrolled through old photos on her phone, searching for clues about Peter's behavior. One image caught her eye. A group photo taken during one of his mission trips to Amsterdam. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, was a figure who looked eerily familiar. It took her a moment to realize why. It resembled Anne, the woman Peter had introduced to her years ago as a distant acquaintance. Her heart sank as pieces began falling into place. Why had Anne been in Amsterdam? And why hadn't Peter mentioned seeing her during his trips? The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Peter's hotel room, casting long shadows across the floor. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at his phone. Esther had sent him a text earlier. "We need to talk when you get back." Just 5 words, but they carried the weight of an impending storm. What could she possibly know? He muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced with possibilities. Had she read more of his journal? Or worse, had she discovered something about Anne? And herself was becoming increasingly insistent that Peter confront his secrets head-on. "You can't keep hiding from this," she told him during their last call. "If you don't deal with it now, it'll only get worse." But how could he face Esther? How could he explain years of lies without shattering everything they'd built together? The thought paralyzed him. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the underground scene she'd stumbled upon weeks ago. At first, it had been about rebellion, a chance to break free from the rigid expectations of her upbringing. But now it felt like something more. She craved the thrill, the anonymity, the sense of belonging she didn't find anywhere else. That night, she attended another private gathering, a dimly lit club where strangers mingled freely, boundaries blurred, and inhibitions melted away. As she moved through the crowd, laughter bubbling from her lips, she spotted someone familiar across the room. For a split second, her heart stopped. It was Anne. Their eyes met briefly before Sarah quickly turned away, panic surging through her veins. She had known about Anne for years. Her father had introduced her once as a distant acquaintance during one of his trips abroad. But Sarah wasn't naive. Over time, subtle hints had added up. Late-night calls Peter tried to hide, vague explanations about his meetings in Amsterdam, and the way Anne seemed far too comfortable around him whenever Sarah saw them together. Now, standing in this club, surrounded by strangers, Sarah's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Anne wasn't just an acquaintance. She was part of her father's secret life. And if Anne was here, what did that mean for Sarah's own involvement in this world? She left the club abruptly, her pulse pounding in her ears. Walking home under the cold glow of streetlights, she replayed the encounter in her mind. Had Anne recognized her? Would she tell her father? Back in Nakuru, Esther couldn't shake the image of Anne in the background of that old photo. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to dig deeper. She scrolled through Peter's social media profiles, searching for any mention of Anne or his trips to Amsterdam. Her search led her to a post from months ago, a casual snapshot of Peter standing outside a cafe in Amsterdam, smiling alongside a group of strangers. Again, Anne appeared in the background, partially cropped out of the frame. This time there was no mistaking it. Something wasn't right. Esther's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the image. Why had Peter lied about seeing Anne? What were they hiding? Later that evening, she called Sarah under the pretense of checking in. "How are things going with your classes?" she asked casually. "They're fine, Mom," Sarah replied, though her tone lacked conviction. "And have you seen anyone interesting lately? Met new people?" Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Not really. Just classmates and professors." Esther pressed further. "What about Anne? Have you run into her since you've been there?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Anne," Sarah repeated, her voice tinged with unease. "Why would I see her?" Esther frowned, sensing the tension in her daughter's response. "I thought maybe. Never mind." Forget I asked. The next morning, Peter boarded his flight back to Nakuru, his mind heavy with dread. Esther's text, "We need to talk when you get back," replayed in his head like a broken record. What had she discovered? How much did she know? As the plane descended into Nairobi, Peter stared out the window at the sprawling city below. 4 years he'd managed to keep his double life intact, but now cracks were forming everywhere. Anne's insistence that he confront his secrets, Sarah's growing rebellion, Esther's probing questions. It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. When he arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. Esther sat at the dining table, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of anger, hurt, and determination. "We need to talk," she said flatly as Peter set his suitcase down. Peter forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, love. What's on your mind?" Esther slid a photo across the table, the one of him standing outside the cafe in Amsterdam, with an partially visible in the background. "Care to explain this?" Peter froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he possibly justify this? "I found your journal too," Esther continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "And let's not forget the scarf I found in your suitcase." "Whose is it, Peter? Or should I say, who is she?" The weight of her accusations hit him like a tidal wave. He sank into a chair, defeated. "It's not what you think," he whispered, though even he didn't believe his own words. Esther leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "Then tell me what it is, Peter. Because right now, I don't recognize the man sitting in front of me." Meanwhile, Sarah wrestled with her suspicions after spotting and in the club. She couldn't shake the image of her father's face whenever he spoke about his trips to Amsterdam, or the way Anne seemed far too comfortable around him during their brief encounters over the years. But then Sarah remembered something critical. Weeks ago, while scrolling through her father's phone, which he often left unattended, she stumbled upon a string of messages between him and Anne. At the time, she dismissed them as casual conversation, but now they took on a new meaning. One message stood out in particular. "Can't wait to see you again. You know how much I miss you." The memory sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Now, seeing and in the club, those words echoed in her mind like a confession. Was this why her father traveled so frequently? Was this why he always seemed distant when he returned home? Determined to confront Anne, Sarah sent her a message using her father's old contact details. "We need to meet. Alone." And replied almost immediately. "Where are you?" They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near Sarah's university. When Sarah walked in and was already seated, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, she looked up as Sarah approached, her expression calm but guarded. "You wanted to see me?" Anne asked, setting her cup down. Sarah slid into the seat across from her, her hands trembling slightly. "I saw you last night," she blurted out. "At the club." Anne's composure faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "What were you doing there?" "That's not the point," Sarah snapped, her voice rising. "Why are you there? And why have you been messaging my dad?" Anne's mask slipped entirely. "What messages?" "The ones on his phone," Sarah shot back. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I read them. I know something's going on between you two." Anne sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's complicated, Sarah. Your father and I. We have a connection. Something neither of us planned." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "So you're just sleeping with him, while he's married to my mom. Do you have any idea how messed up that is?" "It's more than that," Anne insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "But this isn't about me. It's about your father and the choices he's made." Sarah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't get it. You don't know what this does to people, to families. My whole life feels like a lie because of him. Because of both of you." Before Anne could respond, Sarah stood abruptly and stormed out of the cafe, leaving behind a trail of unspoken truths. Back at home, Esther confronted Peter with every piece of evidence she'd gathered. By the end of their heated exchange, Peter broke down, confessing fragments of his double life, but not everything. He omitted details about his encounters in Amsterdam, hoping to shield Esther from the full extent of his betrayal. The confrontation between Esther and Peter left the house heavy with unspoken tension. Though Peter had confessed fragments of his double life, he avoided specifics, especially anything related to and/or his activities in Amsterdam. Esther retreated into silence, her trust shattered but not yet ready to walk away. For now, she chose to observe, to gather more pieces of the puzzle before making any decisions. Peter, meanwhile, tried to act normal, but guilt gnawed at him constantly. Every glance from Esther felt like an accusation, every question a trap. He knew he couldn't keep running forever, but how could he possibly explain everything without destroying what little remained of their marriage? In Amsterdam, Sarah continued spiraling deeper into her rebellion, seeking solace in the underground world she'd discovered. It wasn't just about escaping her father's shadow anymore. It was about finding freedom, even if it came at a cost. She convinced herself that no one would ever find out. After all, who would suspect the pastor's daughter of such indulgence? Her new partner in this lifestyle, a charming man named Daniel, had introduced her to private gatherings where boundaries blurred and identities faded into shadows. Daniel seemed understanding, almost protective, guiding her through experiences she never imagined possible. Under his influence, Sarah began attending more exclusive events, including those held in discreet clubs hidden away from prying eyes. One evening, as they prepared for one of these gatherings, Daniel handed her a mask adorned with intricate designs. "This will help you blend in," he said with a sly smile. "No one will recognize you." Sarah hesitated, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Behind the mask, she barely recognized herself. Who was she becoming? And why did it feel so impossible to stop? Back in Nakuru, Esther decided to dig deeper into Peter's trips abroad. She contacted a mutual acquaintance in Amsterdam under the guise of planning a visit, casually mentioning Peter's frequent stays. The acquaintance revealed something unsettling. Peter often spent time in certain districts known for nightlife and adult entertainment. Esther's heart sank. Was this why he always claimed to be visiting Sarah? Or was there something darker happening during his trips? Later that week, Peter returned to Amsterdam, claiming another mission trip. In reality, he met and at their usual spot, a dimly lit lounge tucked away in the city's red light district. They embraced briefly before heading to the club where they shared their most intimate secrets. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Low lighting cast flickering shadows across the room, and pulsating music drowned out conversation. Couples mingled freely, exchanging glances and whispers. Peter and settled into a private corner, their connection undeniable. As the night wore on, things escalated quickly. The club hosted themed sessions, private rooms designed for exploration and indulgence, and led Peter toward one of these rooms, her hand firmly gripping his. Inside, other couples engaged in steamy encounters, their movements fluid and uninhibited. Peter felt the familiar rush of adrenaline mixed with guilt. This was where he felt most alive, but also most conflicted. As the session progressed, the group prepared to swap partners, a ritual they'd participated in before, and leaned closer, whispering playfully, "Ready?" Peter nodded, forcing a smile despite the unease creeping into his chest. Something about tonight felt different. When it was his turn to move to the next bed, he froze. His blood ran cold as his gaze landed on the face of the woman lying there. Her features were partially obscured by a mask, but he recognized her immediately. It was Sarah. For a moment time stopped. The music faded. The voices around him blurred into silence. All Peter could hear was the deafening roar of his own heartbeat. How had this happened? Why was she here? And why hadn't he seen it coming? As realization dawned on Sarah's face, her eyes widened in horror. She scrambled back, clutching the sheets to her chest. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. The room spun as Peter stumbled backward, unable to process what he was seeing, and watched in stunned silence, piecing together the horrifying truth. The room was silent except for the faint hum of music filtering through the walls. Peter stood frozen, staring at Sarah, who clutched the sheets around her trembling body. The mask she wore had slipped slightly, revealing the face he knew so well, the face of his daughter, the girl he'd raised to follow God's path. But now she looked like a stranger, and slipped out of the room quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. This wasn't her place. Not anymore. Dad! Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. What are you doing here? Peter opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he possibly explain this? Instead, he sank onto the edge of the bed opposite hers, burying his face in his hands. His mind raced with questions. Why was she here? Who had brought her into this world? And how had they ended up in the same room without realizing it? Finally, he found his voice. Sarah, I don't even know where to begin. Maybe start with why you're here, she shot back, her tone sharp but laced with pain. You're my father, a pastor. You preach about sin every Sunday. Do you have any idea how hypocritical this is? Peter flinched at her words, each one cutting deeper than the last. I'm not proud of what I've done, he admitted, his voice breaking. But life isn't as simple as right and wrong, Sarah. Sometimes people get trapped in situations they didn't choose. She stared at him, incredulous. Trapped? Are you saying this is okay because you're trapped? No, that's not what I mean, Peter said quickly. I'm just trying to explain. When I married your mother, it wasn't out of love. It was because of tradition, duty, expectations placed on me by our culture and faith. I wanted someone adventurous, someone willing to explore life with me. But instead, he trailed off, shaking his head. Instead, I got stuck in a marriage that doesn't fulfill me. Esther is a good woman, a faithful, loving wife, but we're worlds apart when it comes to everything else. Sarah listened intently, her anger giving way to confusion. So you decided to cheat on her? To lie to all of us? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Peter said softly. At first it was just an escape, a way to feel alive again. But then it became something bigger. Something I couldn't control. And Anne? Sarah pressed, her voice trembling. What about her? Is she just some fling? Peter hesitated, choosing his words carefully. And understands me, Sarah. She sees the parts of me that no one else does, the parts I've buried under layers of duty and obligation. With her I can be myself. Not Pastor Peter, not your father. Just Peter. Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession. And what about me? Did you ever stop to think about how your choices affect the rest of us? Mom. Me. I never meant to hurt anyone, Peter insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. But I see now that I've failed you, in more ways than one. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken truths and years of pent-up emotions. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. Do you think I wanted this? She asked, gesturing to the room around them. Do you think I came here because I enjoy it? I did it because I was tired of living in your shadow. Tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. You taught me to fear judgment, to suppress my desires, to live a life dictated by rules I didn't choose. So yeah, maybe I rebelled. Maybe I went too far. But don't act like you're the only one who's been lying. Her words hit Peter like a punch to the gut. For the first time he saw himself through her eyes. A hypocrite, a man who preached morality but lived in secrecy. The irony wasn't lost on him. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I never realized. Realized what? Sarah snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks. That your lies have consequences. That your double life has shaped mine too. They sat in silence once more, the enormity of their shared secrets pressing down on them. In that moment they weren't father and daughter. They were two broken people, struggling to reconcile who they were with who they wanted to be. The next morning, Peter woke up in his hotel room, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't escape. Sarah's tear-streaked face haunted him, the look of betrayal in her eyes, the raw pain in her voice. He had always seen himself as a protector, a guide. But now, he realized he had failed her in ways he never imagined. And sat across the room, sipping coffee silently. She hadn't said much since the incident, sensing that Peter needed space to process what had happened. But her presence was a reminder of the life he'd built outside his family, a life that had collided with his reality in the most devastating way possible. "Are you going to tell her?" Anne asked, finally breaking the silence. Peter looked up, startled. "Tell who what?" "Esther," and clarified gently. "About everything. About us. About Sarah." Panic surged through Peter's chest at the thought. "I can't," he said firmly. "Not yet. If Esther finds out about any of this, I don't know how she'll react." And raised an eyebrow, her tone sharp but measured. "You think keeping secrets is going to make this better? Peter, your daughter knows. Your wife suspects. You're running out of time." Her words echoed in his mind long after she left the room. Running out of time. The phrase felt like a death sentence. How could he possibly fix something so broken? Meanwhile, back in Nakuru, Esther wrestled with her own turmoil. After uncovering evidence of Peter's trips to Amsterdam and his connection to Anne, she decided to confront Sarah under the pretense of checking in. "How are things going over there?" Esther asked casually during their call. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Fine, Mom. Classes are busy, but I'm managing. And socially. Have you met anyone interesting?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Not really. Just classmates and professors." Esther pressed further, her maternal instincts kicking in. "What about Daniel? You mentioned him once before. Is he still around?" Sarah stiffened, her grip tightening on the phone. "Why are you asking about him?" "I'm just curious," Esther replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "He seems important to you." "He's just a friend," Sarah lied, her voice wavering slightly. "Nothing serious." Esther frowned, sensing the tension in her daughter's response. Something wasn't right. She made a mental note to dig deeper when Sarah returned home. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her dorm room, replaying her conversation with Esther. Her mother's probing questions had rattled her, stirring up guilt and fear. What if Esther already suspected something? What if she found out about Daniel, or worse, about last night? As she scrolled through old photos on her phone, one image caught her eye. A family portrait taken years ago during a church retreat. In it, Peter stood tall and proud, his arm draped protectively around Sarah's shoulders. Back then, she had idolized him, believing every word he preached. Now, she barely recognized the man behind the pulpit. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the photo. How had they ended up here? When had their lives become so tangled in lies? Back in Amsterdam, Peter tried to focus on organizing his thoughts for his return home. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of Sarah lying on that bed, her face etched with shock and betrayal. He had always believed he was protecting his family by keeping his double life hidden, but now he realized he had only caused more harm. The next evening, Peter wandered the streets of Amsterdam, his mind heavy with guilt and confusion. Every step felt like walking deeper into quicksand. The harder he tried to escape, the more entangled he became in his own lies. The city buzzed around him. Cyclists weaving through traffic, tourists snapping photos, vendors shouting over the hum of conversation. But Peter felt isolated, lost in a storm of thoughts he couldn't silence. As he passed a quiet cafe near Sarah's university, he spotted her sitting alone at a corner table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. For a moment, he considered turning away, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, the same exhaustion and longing he saw reflected in his own. "Mind if I join you?" he asked hesitantly, pulling out a chair before she could respond. Sarah glanced up, startled. Then she nodded, gesturing for him to sit. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken truths. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. "I didn't think I'd see you again so soon." "I couldn't leave," Peter admitted softly. "Not after everything." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "Yeah, me neither." They sat in silence again, the weight of their shared secrets pressing down on them. Finally, Peter leaned forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I've spent my whole life pretending to be someone I'm not. For God, for the church, for your mother. For you. And now, I don't even recognize myself anymore." Sarah listened intently, her anger giving way to empathy. She had always seen her father as an authority figure, a man who preached rules he never followed. But now, sitting across from him, she saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't just a hypocrite. He was a man trapped in a life he didn't choose. "Do you love Anne?" she asked suddenly, surprising even herself. Peter hesitated, taken aback by the question. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I ever thought possible." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Then why would you give her up? Why would you sacrifice the one thing that makes you happy just to keep up appearances?" "It's not that simple," Peter replied, shaking his head. "If I stay with and I lose everything, your mother, our family, my reputation, I'd be throwing away years of work, of sacrifice. All for what? A fleeting moment of happiness." "No, Dad," Sarah said firmly, leaning forward. "It's not fleeting. You said yourself you've never felt this way before. Not with Mom, not with anyone. So why should you walk away from that? Life is too short to waste it pretending to be someone you're not. If it makes you happy, if she truly understands you, then you owe it to yourself to fight for her. No matter what the cost." Peter stared at her, stunned by the conviction in her voice. "But what about your mother? What about you? How could I possibly explain this to either of you?" "You don't owe us an explanation," Sarah countered, her tone softening. "You owe us honesty. Mom deserves to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And me." She paused, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just want you to be happy, Dad. Really, truly happy. Not the version of happiness people expect from you, but the kind that sets your soul on fire." Her words hit him like a tidal wave, washing away years of guilt and self-doubt. For so long he had believed that his duty, to his family, to the church, to society, was more important than his own desires. But hearing Sarah defend his right to pursue happiness made him realize how wrong he had been. "What if I lose everything?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Then you rebuild," Sarah said simply. "From the ground up. With whoever makes you whole. Because the alternative, living a lie for the rest of your life, isn't living at all." The cafe was quiet, save for the faint murmur of conversations around them. Peter sat across from Sarah, his expression softer now, a mix of gratitude and concern. Her earlier words still echoed in his mind. Life is too short to waste it pretending. He realized she was right, not just about him but about herself too. "Sarah," he began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, startled by the shift in tone. "Sure. What do you want? Not what people expect from you. Not your mom, not me, not the church, but what do you truly desire?" Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. At least not like this. She had spent her entire life trying to meet others' expectations, molding herself into the perfect daughter, the devout Christian girl. But now, sitting across from her father, the man who had once embodied those same expectations, she felt a strange sense of freedom. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "I've always done what everyone else wanted me to do. Be the good girl. Go to church. Follow the rules. But lately, I've been wondering if that's really who I am." Peter nodded, his gaze steady. And what about the club? The lifestyle you've been exploring here in Amsterdam? Is that who you are? Or is it just rebellion? Sarah thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Maybe both, she said softly. At first, it was rebellion, a way to escape everything I hated about my old life. But now, I think there's more to it. It's like I found a part of myself I didn't even know existed. A side of me that doesn't care about judgment or guilt. Peter listened intently, seeing parallels between her journey and his own. Like him, she had been suffocating under the weight of expectations, desperate for a taste of freedom. Do you regret it? He asked gently. Any of it? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No. Even though it scares me sometimes, even though I know people would judge me if they knew, I can't imagine going back to the way things were. Peter reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then don't, he said firmly, surprising even himself. Don't hide behind the mask anymore, Sarah. Don't let fear or shame dictate who you are. If this is what makes you happy, if this is where you feel alive, then embrace it. Fully. But what about everyone else? She whispered, her voice breaking. What will they say? What will Mom think? To hell with what they think, Peter replied, his tone uncharacteristically fierce. You're allowed to be human, Sarah. To make mistakes. To chase happiness, even if it looks different from what people expect. You've spent your whole life living for others. Isn't it time you started living for yourself? His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, she had believed that being the good Christian girl was the only path worth taking. But now, hearing her father, of all people, encourage her to follow her heart made her realize how wrong she had been. And if anyone tries to judge you, Peter continued, his voice softening, point them to me, because I'm guilty of the same thing. We're both just trying to figure out who we are, and that's okay. Sarah smiled through her tears, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years she felt seen, not as the perfect daughter or the rebellious teenager, but simply as herself. The next evening, Peter met and at their usual spot, a small, dimly lit lounge tucked away in the heart of Amsterdam. The air buzzed with quiet energy, but neither of them noticed. Tonight, they weren't here for indulgence or escape. This was different. And sat across from him, her expression guarded yet curious. She could sense something had shifted since their last meeting. The weight of his secrets colliding with reality had changed him. Or maybe it was Sarah's unexpected presence in their lives that had forced him to confront who he truly wanted to be. I need to say something, Peter began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Something I've never said to anyone before. And raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. For years I've lived two lives, one in Nakuru, one here. Both felt incomplete, like pieces of me were missing. But when I'm with you, everything makes sense. You see me, not Pastor Peter, not the man everyone expects me to be, but just me. Honest, flawed. And watched him intently, her gaze softening. You're saying I make you feel alive? Yes, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. But it's more than that. It's the connection we share, the way we understand each other without words, the way we can be ourselves no matter how messy or complicated life gets. That's rare and I refuse to walk away from it. Not anymore. She leaned back, processing his words. What are you saying, Peter? Are you ready to give up everything for this? For us? I already have, he replied firmly. I've chosen myself this time. My happiness. My truth. No matter what happens, whether Esther finds out, whether my family falls apart, I won't turn my back on who I am. Not again. And hesitated, her emotions flickering across her face. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust that he was ready to build something real, but another part worried he was caught up in the intensity of the moment. What about me? She asked finally, her tone soft but probing. Do you think I'm part of this because I love you, or because I love the lifestyle we share? Peter nodded, acknowledging the validity of her question. That's why I'm asking you to decide for yourself. Be honest with me, and do you want to be with me because of who I am? Or because of what we do together? Her silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. It started as the latter, Peter. I won't lie to you. At first it was thrilling, the secrecy, the rebellion against everything we were taught to believe. But somewhere along the way it became more than that. With you I feel safe, understood. Like I don't have to hide anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. If we're doing this, if we're choosing each other, then it has to be real. No hiding behind masks or running from consequences. Can you promise me that? I can, Peter said without hesitation. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you. And smiled through her tears, reaching across the table to take his hand. Then yes, choose you too. Not the lifestyle, not the thrill, but you. The flight back to Nakuru felt like the longest hours of Peter's life. He had spent days rehearsing what he would say to Esther, but no words seemed adequate to explain decades of deception. How could he possibly justify the double life he'd been living? And how would she react when she learned about Anne, not just as a lover, but as the woman he wanted to build a future with? When he arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. Esther sat at the dining table, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of anger, hurt, and determination. We need to talk, she said flatly as Peter set his suitcase down. Peter nodded, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. I know. Esther slid a photo across the table, the one of him standing outside the cafe in Amsterdam, with Anne partially visible in the background. Start explaining. Peter took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. There's someone else, Esther. Someone I've been seeing for years. Her name is Anne. Esther's face remained impassive, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. Go on. I didn't plan for it to happen, Peter continued, his voice trembling. At first it was just an escape, a way to feel alive again. But then it became something more. Something real. And what about us? Esther asked, her tone sharp but controlled. What about our family? Our vows? I don't expect you to forgive me, Peter admitted, tears welling up in his eyes. But I can't keep living this lie. Lovin'. She's the only person who truly understands me, the parts of me I've buried under layers of duty and obligation. With her I can breathe, be myself. For a long moment Esther said nothing. Then, to Peter's astonishment, she leaned back in her chair and sighed deeply. I see. You see. Peter repeated, confusion creeping into his voice. What does that mean? It means, Esther began, her tone eerily calm, that I cannot afford to be seen as a divorced woman. My reputation, our family's reputation, is too important. People look up to me, Peter. They respect me. If word got out that my husband left me for another woman, it would destroy everything I've worked for. Peter stared at her, stunned. Are you saying you're okay with this? With me being with someone else? No, Esther clarified sharply. I'm not okay with it. But I'm willing to compromise. For the sake of appearances. You can have your arrangement with Anne, as long as it stays in Amsterdam. Out of sight, out of mind. Here we maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. For the church. For Sarah. For everyone. Her words hit Peter like a punch to the gut. He had expected anger, betrayal, even hatred, but not this. Not a cold, calculated decision to preserve their public image at the expense of honesty and integrity. That's not enough, Peter said firmly, shaking his head. I can't keep living two lives, Esther. It's tearing me apart. I have to choose one path or the other. And I've already made my choice. Esther frowned, her composure slipping slightly. What are you saying? I'm leaving, Peter declared, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I'm leaving the church. Leaving this life. I'm going to be with Anne, openly, honestly. No more secrets. No more lies. Esther's eyes widened in disbelief. You'd throw everything away. Your ministry. Your family. For her. Yes, Peter replied without hesitation. Because staying here, living this lie, isn't living at all. I owe it to myself too and to everyone I've hurt to finally do the right thing. Even if it costs me everything. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Esther stared at Peter, her expression unreadable but her eyes blazing with a mix of betrayal and disbelief. 4 years she had stood by him, supported him, trusted him, and now he was choosing someone else over their marriage, over their family. You're really going to do this, she said finally, her voice low and trembling. You're willing to destroy everything we've built for her. I'm not destroying anything, Peter replied, his tone firm but laced with guilt. I'm trying to rebuild, starting with myself. I can't keep pretending to be something I'm not, Esther. Not anymore. Esther stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, as if she were trying to physically process the weight of his words. And what about Sarah? Have you thought about how this will affect her? How it will look to everyone else? I've thought about nothing else, Peter admitted, running a hand through his hair. But hiding the truth hasn't protected anyone. It's only hurt us more. Sarah deserves honesty. All of us do. Esther stopped mid-step, turning to face him. Honesty. Is that what you call this? Abandoning your family, your congregation, everything you claim to believe in, that's not honesty, Peter. That's selfishness. Her accusation stung, cutting deeper than any physical blow ever could. But Peter refused to back down. Maybe it is selfish, he conceded. But staying here, living this lie, isn't selfless. It's cowardly. And I won't do it anymore. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken truths and years of pent-up emotions. Finally, Esther broke the quiet. Fine, she said sharply, her voice cold and detached. Go. Be with your But don't expect me to sit idly by while you ruin our lives. If you walk away from this family, don't think for a second that I'll let you come crawling back. Peter flinched at her words, but he knew there was no turning back now. He nodded solemnly, meeting her gaze. I understand. Later that evening, Peter dialed Sarah's number, his heart racing as he waited for her to answer. When she picked up, her voice was warm, tinged with curiosity. She had been expecting his call ever since he returned home. Hey, Dad, she greeted him cautiously. How did it go with Mom? Peter sighed, leaning back in his chair. It was intense. She didn't take it well, but she knows the truth now. About everything. Sarah paused, absorbing his words. Are you okay? I will be, Peter admitted softly. It's not easy, but I feel lighter. Like I've finally stepped out of the shadows. I'm going to tell the church next, and then I'm leaving. For good. Sarah smiled on the other end of the line, relief washing over her. I'm so proud of you, Dad. You've spent your whole life carrying this weight. Now you're free. Thank you, Sarah, Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. Your support means more to me than you'll ever know. There was a brief pause before Sarah spoke again, her tone growing serious. Just one thing we need to make sure Mom never finds out about. The club. Or that I knew about any of this before now. Peter nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Agreed. Some truths are better left unsaid, for everyone's sake. Sarah exhaled sharply, gratitude and relief evident in her voice. Good. 'Cause I want you to start fresh. No guilt, no looking back, just freedom. Peter smiled faintly, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. That's all I've ever wanted, for both of us. The church was packed that Sunday morning, the congregation buzzing with anticipation. Rumors had spread like wildfire after Peter announced he needed to address the entire community during service. Some speculated it was about a new mission project. Others whispered darker theories. But no one, not even Esther, could have predicted what was coming. Peter stood at the pulpit, his hands gripping the edges tightly as he surveyed the familiar faces before him. These were people he had led for years, people who trusted him implicitly. And now he was about to shatter that trust forever. "I've called you here today," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "to confess something I should have shared long ago. For years I've lived two lives, one in this church and another hidden from view. I've preached God's word while hiding behind lies of my own making." A murmur rippled through the congregation, but Peter pressed on, his gaze unwavering. "I am leaving the ministry, leaving this life. Not because I've lost faith, but because I can no longer live a lie. There is someone else, a woman named N, who has shown me what it means to truly be alive. To be free." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary, followed by stunned silence. Esther sat rigidly in the front row, her face pale and unreadable. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it publicly declared in front of everyone they knew felt like a knife twisting in her chest. "I don't expect your forgiveness," Peter continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But I owe it to myself and to all of you to tell the truth. Whatever consequences come from this decision, I accept them willingly. Because living authentically is worth any price." With that, he stepped down from the pulpit and walked out of the church, leaving chaos in his wake. Outside, Esther stormed ahead of him, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Peter hurried to catch up, calling her name. "Esther, wait," he pleaded, grabbing her arm gently. She spun around, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you humiliate me like that? In front of everyone we know. Did you ever stop to think how this would affect me?" "I didn't do it to hurt you," Peter said softly, though guilt weighed heavily on his shoulders. "I did it because I couldn't keep pretending anymore. You deserve better than a man who hides behind lies." "Better?" Esther snapped, tears streaming down her face. "Is that supposed to make this okay? Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How many years I stood by your side, supporting you, believing in you, only to find out you've been living a double life the whole time?" Peter looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Esther. Truly. I never wanted to hurt you or Sarah. But staying silent was killing me. I had to choose between being the man you thought I was or the man I really am. And you chose her," Esther shot back bitterly. "You chose some woman over your family, over everything we built together." "It's not about choosing someone over you," Peter insisted, his voice trembling. "It's about choosing myself, for once. For the first time in my life I'm trying to be honest. With you, with me, with everyone." Esther shook her head, her anger giving way to raw pain. "I understand why you're doing this," she admitted quietly, her voice breaking. "I see now that you've struggled for years, trapped in this role you never wanted. But understanding doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean I don't feel betrayed." Peter reached for her hand, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. "I wish things could have been different," he murmured, tears welling up in his eyes. "But I can't undo the past. All I can do is try to make things right moving forward." Esther stared at him for a long moment, her expression a mix of sadness and resignation. Finally, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot. The days following Peter's confession were a blur of chaos and emotion. The church congregation was in turmoil, some members condemning him outright while others whispered prayers for his redemption. Esther had retreated into silence, avoiding him entirely except for brief, tense exchanges about logistics. And Sarah remained supportive, but Peter could see the sadness in her eyes whenever they spoke. She understood his choice, but it didn't make saying goodbye any easier. Now, as he packed the last of his belongings into a suitcase, Peter felt a mix of relief and sorrow. He was leaving everything familiar behind: the home he'd shared with Esther, the church where he'd preached for decades, the community that had once been his entire world. But he was also stepping toward something new, something real. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a life without secrets, a life with Anne and Sarah by his side. His phone buzzed on the bed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Anne calling to check in. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with both excitement and concern. "As ready as I'll ever be," Peter replied, glancing around the room one last time. "I've booked my flight for tomorrow morning. Once I'm there, we can figure out the next steps together." And hesitated before responding. "And Sarah? Have you talked to her about how this will work?" Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, we've discussed it. She knows I'm coming to stay with you, and that I want to rebuild our relationship properly. She's processing everything, but she seems okay with it. She's stronger than she looks," Anne said gently. "She's been handling her own struggles for a while now." "I know," Peter admitted, a lump forming in his throat. "But seeing her in person again, knowing what she's been through, it's going to hit hard." Later that evening, Peter sat down with Sarah over a video call. Her face appeared on the screen, framed by the dim light of her dorm room. Despite the distance between them, he could see the conflicting emotions in her eyes. Pride for his courage, sadness for what they were losing. "So this is really happening," Sarah said finally, forcing a smile. "You're leaving tomorrow." "Yes," Peter confirmed, his voice soft but steady. "It's time, Sarah. I can't keep living in limbo. I need to build a life that feels true, to me too and to who I am now." Sarah nodded, though her gaze dropped to the table. "I get it, Dad. Really I do. I'm nervous about how all of this will play out. You, me, and it's complicated." "It is," Peter agreed, his tone gentle but firm. "But I think complication is part of being honest. We've spent so long hiding from each other, and ourselves, that maybe it's time we face things head-on. Together." Sarah smiled faintly, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe you're right. One step at a time, huh?" "One step at a time," Peter echoed, reaching toward the screen as if trying to bridge the distance between them. "Once I'm there, we'll figure it out. All of us. No more secrets. No more lies." As they ended the call, bold text flashed across the screen. "Sometimes starting over is the only way forward." Fade out. The next morning, Peter stood outside the house with his suitcase in hand, taking one final look at the life he was leaving behind. Esther emerged from the doorway, her expression unreadable but her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resolve. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly, her voice devoid of anger but heavy with resignation. "And don't forget, you'll always have a daughter who loves you no matter what." Peter nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Esther, for everything." With that, he turned and walked toward the taxi waiting at the curb. As the car pulled away, he glanced back one last time, committing the image of his old life to memory before turning his focus to the road ahead. The plane descended into Amsterdam, the city lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. Peter stared out the window, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was it, the moment he had dreamed of for years. Fresh start, a chance to live authentically, surrounded by the people who truly understood him. As he stepped off the plane, the cool evening air greeted him like an old friend. He scanned the arrivals area, searching for familiar faces. Then he saw them, and standing confidently near the exit, her arms crossed but her smile warm, and Sarah beside her, looking both nervous and hopeful. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Peter dropped his suitcase and rushed toward them, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. She hugged him back fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Me too, sweetheart," Peter replied, holding her close. "More than you'll ever know." When they finally pulled apart and stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, her touch grounded him, reminding him why he had made this leap of faith. For the first time in years he felt whole. Later that evening, the three of them sat together in Anne's cozy apartment, sharing stories over cups of tea. The atmosphere was light but tinged with unspoken tension, the weight of everything they had been through lingering just beneath the surface. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, finally breaking the quiet. "How do we navigate all of this?" Peter exchanged a glance with, and before turning to Sarah, his expression soft but resolute. "We take it one day at a time. Together. No more secrets, no more hiding. Just honesty with ourselves and each other." Sarah nodded slowly, processing his words. "It won't be easy though. People will judge us. They already have. They always will," and added gently, reaching across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "But their opinions don't define us. Only we get to decide who we are, and what kind of life we want to live." Peter leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "For so long I let fear dictate my choices. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of disappointing others. But in trying to please everyone I lost myself. And I almost lost both of you in the process." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "I never want either of you to feel trapped the way I did. Culture, family expectations, they can shape us, but they shouldn't control us. We have to carve out our own paths, even if it means going against the grain. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is being true to ourselves." Sarah smiled faintly, wiping away a tear. "That's easier said than done, Dad. But hearing you say it, it gives me hope. Maybe I can figure out who I am without feeling guilty about it." "You will," Peter assured her, his tone filled with conviction. "And when you do, I'll be right here cheering you on. Both of us will." Anne nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We're in this together. No matter what comes next." As the night wore on, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared struggles giving way to a sense of peace. Outside, the city buzzed with energy, a reminder that life was messy, unpredictable, and beautiful all at once. Before heading to bed, Peter stood by the window, gazing out at the glowing skyline. For the first time in years he felt free, not just from the lies he had lived, but from the chains of expectation that had bound him for so long.